Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. And both before and since the general election, Boris Johnson kept publicly insisting that there would be no checks on goods on any border inside the UK. No checks on goods passing across the Irish Sea. Now the government have confirmed that those checks will be taking place in a letter and in confirmation with a hearing for Stormont. But this story has massive implications for the Brexit argument beyond just the necessary border checks that we said were going to happen right from the start. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, quick reminder that Boris Johnson succeeded where Theresa May failed in getting a withdrawal agreement that met the approval of both the EU and the swivel-eyed loons in the Conservative Party. Now, the way he managed to do this was by adopting a solution, first proposed by the EU, some years ago actually, that allowed for no hard border inside Ireland. Of course, there had to be a customs border somewhere if we were going to diverge customs arrangements. So Johnson agreed to have that border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, in other words, inside the UK. So, in order to avoid this border inside Ireland, he shifted it inside the UK. So now British people might have to fill in paperwork to send goods to another place inside their own country, effectively. Nice one. Okay. But naturally, this isn't the sort of thing that's going to play out well amongst the swivel-eyed loons. So the next part of his plan was to tell the headbangers that he had crossed his fingers behind his back whilst he was agreeing this. Publicly, he said that there would be no checks along the Irish Sea, even as he was ordering MPs to pass into law a treaty that said there would be. But members of the public generally don't read legal documents. Even MPs passing them into law don't usually bother. So those of us paying attention just had to be patient and wait until Johnson had to stop talking about what was going to happen and get to the point where it had to actually happen. Would there be checks or wouldn't there? If so, Johnson is the guy who erects border posts inside the UK. If not, he's the guy who causes them to be erected inside Ireland again, as well as telling the world that it makes no difference what deal they agree with the UK. He will just ignore any of the terms of that deal if it's not politically expedient. Now, to my mind, it could never be the second. Not because I didn't believe he was insane enough, but Boris Johnson, for all of his insanity, would surely never try and piss off the world in such a way because he needs deals to secure any political future. He doesn't need a deal with the EU. In fact, it could be argued a deal with the EU is fairly poisonous to his political security. But he does need deals from somewhere, anywhere. And that's not going to be easy if he just tears up agreements he's already made. And now it's arrived. The point has arrived. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't see any sign of the border arrangements being set up by the end of this year. So international legal action, you would think, is going to ensue if we leave the transition period at the end of 2020. And not just from nations and the EU, but individual businesses who get screwed over by this as well. Because Boris Johnson has been filmed as video, you can look it up on Google, telling businesses that there would be no checks on goods crossing the Irish Sea. He even said that anyone being told to fill in such a form should telephone the Prime Minister and he would direct them to put it in the bin. Well, the intention has now been made clear. In a letter to Stormont, the Northern Ireland Assembly, the government in Westminster have said that there would be border control posts set up in Belfast, Warrenpoint and Larne, and all to check goods crossing the Irish Sea. In response, the government have insisted that it always said there would be checks on certain goods. Oh, we never said otherwise. But it makes no difference what they claim Boris Johnson will have meant by telling people that there will be no checks on goods crossing the Irish Sea and that they can throw paperwork in the bin. The fact is, if you don't have that paperwork, then you won't be getting those certain goods through those border checks. Boris Johnson said there would be no checks. Apparently, that means there will be some checks. I guess that means in the same way that, what does stay alert mean? Boris Johnson said, stay alert means wash your hands. Right, okay, that makes sense. But it only applies to agriculture and live animal exports, insists the Brexit crowd. Oh, it's only applying to those, as if that's a really small amount of the goods that cross the Irish Sea. Of course, they have to say this to justify their continued support for Johnson. It's the mental gymnastics that their brain has to go through in order to keep faith with the blonde buffoon whilst believing completely contradictory things every few weeks. But this letter had to be released now. Next month is crunch time. Stormont are getting antsy. If the government insists that they won't extend the transition period, and they're clearly not engaging in genuine negotiations, so there is no chance of a deal at the end of the year, then it's definitely a hard Brexit at the end of the year, and people need to be ready for that. And people in Northern Ireland especially need to be ready for it, because they're going to enter into a very strange set of circumstances next year. And that means those border checks have to be in place for any sort of trade to be able to exist between Great Britain and any part of Ireland. But for anyone in Northern Ireland exporting or importing any goods at all. And that will include from within their own country. Strange to call those imports and exports, but that's what it's going to be. But there isn't time. We were already warned about the 17-mile queues at Dover because we've not been expanding facilities there. We keep saying we're going to, but we haven't. I shudder to think what the delays will be around these ports in the Irish Sea if they're not fully staffed and built yet. And civil servants were at the start of the year saying that there wasn't enough time to expand the necessary border facilities in a year. That's what they were saying at the start of this year. Well, now we've got half a year to do it, and there's a global pandemic that is massively reducing normal working efficiency. I can't imagine what will be happening in private as a minister tells senior members of the civil service, we need these posts to be built now and fully staffed and operational by the end of the year. I can't even imagine what they will say to those ministers. You know, even the Brexit supporting Telegraph have started arguing for a Brexit extension now. Pretty soon it will only be the Mail and the Sun left arguing for the insanity of a cliff edge Brexit, because the Times and the Financial Times have for the longest time been arguing for a transition extension. And for those who will be wanting to write those 3 poorly conceived letters in response to this, WTO, I would think again. Or better still, I think I need to go over how poorly conceived such a response will be, but later this week in a separate video. Until then, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.